Welcome inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller along with Jeff Nowak in a post-season edition without any Black and Gold involvement, but there's still other things to talk about. We'll get into the divisional round and what happened there. A few things in the coaching, front on offensive coordinator at least. And then I know we've got some audio of a conversation we had with Scott Shanle. And we'll get into some of Jeff's needs for this team coming up for next season. And I don't know, I kind of joked with you and said, I was like, man, there's a lot. And you're like, well, not really a lot.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as there's a lot of things you can do. But when I say positions of need, I mean, like, you need to address this right now. Like, this is not an option. It's not, you're looking at it and be like, well, we could let it ride. Like, no. You need to fix it. And there's only a couple positions that I look at like that. And then there are a handful of other positions that, I would, for example, like tight end. I don't think anyone's going to look at tight end and say like, oh, if they don't get another tight end, they're in serious trouble. But I really would love to be one of these teams in the playoffs that has these star tight ends. And we're going to talk about the divisional round here for a second. And, that's a major theme is like, look at all these great tight ends and all these teams that are still playing football with all these. Anyway, we'll talk about that. Yeah, we talked to Scott Shanle on WWL Radio on Friday. So I kind of trimmed that down so we can play that here. He had some interesting things today about to say about the coaching search, where this team is, where he sees it. Obviously, he was a former linebacker, so he has some insight there. But yeah, this first segment, I want to get into the latest on the coaching search, the offensive coordinator search. There have been a couple hires that are worth noting, and we'll get into that. But first of all, the divisional round, what the Lions are kind of fascinating to me, and that Lions-Bucks matchup was particularly interesting because, Saints played the Lions, Saints played the Bucks. That was a close game, kind of got away from the Bucks at the end there. We saw Todd Bowles do something that was very un-Todd Bowles-like, and I think I think he and Dennis Allen are very similar, where they make decisions that don't, sometimes they do stuff, sometimes they don't. And it does seem to be like they get caught up in the moment. Like, I don't think like the Bucks did the thing that the Packers did to the Saints in this game where they were down 14 going, in the final couple of minutes, and they scored a touchdown and they went for two. And it's something like there's something just very un-Todd Bowles-like about that decision. And I thought it was interesting because it's like, Dan Campbell would do that 10 times out of 10. And it did seem like Todd Bowles was trying to out Dan Campbell in that moment. Dan Gamble, if you will. But, it didn't end up mattering. They missed that 2-point conversion. But I do appreciate that, like, people have now come to terms with the fact that, like, the math does support that. But, the Lions won, the Ravens won, the 49ers won, and the Chiefs won, which, only one higher seeded team actually lost in that round, and it was the team with Pat Mahomes on it. So it's not exactly a stunner, but I think there's some themes with these teams, right? You have a quarterback, that you trust, a veteran quarterback in most cases, right? Like in all cases, really. But you have running games. You have defenses that can cover. And the X factor to me was always going to be Lamar Jackson and whether he could get to a Super Bowl healthy, because Lamar Jackson in the playoffs is a different player. And they're still my pick. I think the Ravens are going to win it all. Definitely
look, super impressive. And, Lamar got that whole stigma around him over and done with, being the postseason kind of deal. And I just think obviously he's got a much better team around him too right now, helping him out offensively. But you mentioned too a little bit about tight ends, and I'm just thinking about back to the Bucks and Lions game. Cade Otton and Laporta, like two young guys, getting it really, really important pieces in those playoff games. And I still feel like the Saints have that kind of piece in a guy like Juwan Johnson, and then for whatever reason, I don't know if that injury just hampered him more in the beginning of the year or not.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it in the last segment. But no, I agree. I mean, it's not even, look at Dalton Kincaid and Travis Kelce, right?
Right. There's another one.
You look at the Ravens and like Isaiah Likely's catching a touchdown, but that's a team that is playing without Mark Andrews, right? Like Mark Andrews is Mark Andrews missed half the season and he's still out, like had better numbers and catches, receptions, and touchdowns than Jawan Johnson, right? It's a theme. It's not a one-off. Like all of these teams, even like the Packers with Luke Musgrave, he was a second round pick. Like he's a high-end pick, like he's going up against George Kittle. So it's only the Saints that seem to think, at least in terms of successful teams in the NFL, right? Even Dalton Schultz, like the Texans got a lot out of Dalton Schultz this year. It's just like the Saints are the team that seems to be trying to go cheap at tight end. And all of these other teams are kind of finding premium assets at tight end, and it's working out for them. And wasn't it nice when the Saints were the team that had the tight end you couldn't cover? I think that's part of the reason everyone was excited that Jimmy Graham was coming back, because it reminded them of that era when the Saints had tight ends that impacted games. And right now, they're the team that doesn't have a tight end impacting games.
Right. And it's a little frustrating, obviously, when this year's draft class, this last one, was so stocked with so many, right? And you didn't get any.
Like, I want Brock Bowers, man. If he drops to 14 and they don't pick Brock Bowers, I'm going to throw a rock through a window somewhere. But all right, let's, one of the things that is interesting, and we'll kind of tie into the coaching search here, is after the divisional round, you can start to interview coaches on playoff teams. And for 4 of the playoff teams that they lost, so there's no interference whatsoever. And then the other 4 teams, this is the part of the year where you're like, this is kind of annoying. You're going into your biggest game of the year, and suddenly your assistant coaches start getting pestered by other teams. Seems weird. Like, I don't understand. Is it really, like, I get it, because by the time the Super Bowl comes around, you're looking at it and saying, well, the Senior Bowl's right around the corner. The Combine's right around the corner. All these pro days are coming up. But can't you wait until the NFC championships are over? These 4 teams are going into their biggest games of the season. Now, you have a week off between the NFC championship, the AFC championship, and the Super Bowl. So why can't that happen? Like, why can't the 4 teams, like the NFL should just say, hey, leave those 4 teams alone. Bother them next week, right?
They got a little bit other stuff on their mind at the moment.
Just a little bit. Like, it just seems so odd to me that, and like the coaches don't really have a choice, because if they don't take these interviews now, then who's to say these teams don't move on in their search? If like Joe Brady's getting head coaching, and I guess he's not a good example because they lost, but it's just kind of strange. But either way, that does open. And I think this was the week. One of the reasons I wasn't really that annoyed at the Saints taking their time was because you couldn't. 25% of the NFL's coaches were not eligible to be interviewed until this week. So, that's kind of your deadline of like, we need to be well into this search and ready to go. Like, someone was complaining to me a couple weeks ago that, someone's going to get hired prior to the Saints having a chance at them. Right. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. And so Shane Waldron, and that's where we can go first. Shane Waldron, who the Saints have requested to interview, and as far as I know, they did interview, was expected to be hired as the Bears as their offensive coordinator. And someone replied to an old thread, it's like this, as if they were like, this is what I was saying was going to happen. Except the Saints, but like the Saints did interview him. It's not like they didn't interview. Like, you can't prevent people from taking different situations. And I think when you look at it, it's kind of funny, because one of the reasons that I thought Shane Waldron made a lot of sense for the Saints is because Dennis Allen's situation is kind of tenuous, right? I don't know what this is going to look like 12 months from now, but there's a lot riding on this season, and I want someone who can hit the ground running. What other team is in a very similar situation in regard to their head coach, at the very least, is the Bears and Matt Eberflus, right? So it makes sense that they would also be looking at Shane Waldron. And when you look at the Saints situation compared to the Bears situation, it's not hard to understand why one is a little bit more attractive than the other, because one, you have the number 1 overall pick, so you could potentially go get Caleb Williams and go from there, or you could stick with Justin Fields if Justin Fields is a guy that you really like, and you're Shane Waldron. You're like, yeah, now I have the number 1 pick that we can trade, and then all these other picks. I can build from the ground up here. Whereas in New Orleans, it's a bit, I think the Bears situation was always going to be tough. If he had offers from the Saints and the Bears, I'm not surprised that he picked the Bears. Either way, Shane Waldron's off the table, and he was probably at the top of my list personally in terms of the names that we know about. So that's really the only name in terms of offensive coordinators that's been hired. So you kind of start from there and move.
And then a new name popped up on the Saints list.
Yeah. Texans quarterback coach Gerard Johnson. Gerard's interesting, and a lot of these guys are interesting because, when you try to, from our perspective, right, we don't know the conversations that are going on behind closed doors, and on Airline Drive, but it's kind of easy to see themes of like the Shanahan and McVay coaching trees and who you're targeting. There seems to be a lot of connections there, but it is funny because Gerard Johnson's connection to the Mike Shanahan coaching tree is Bobby Slowick. Like Mike, there's, at what point are the degrees of separation too much where this is not a leaf that fell off that tree, it's just a new plant? Because this is a Bobby Slowick guy. It's not a Mike Shanahan guy, but Bobby Slowick was a Mike Shanahan guy. And that's why Bobby Slowick is getting head coach interviews. And it is an interesting scenario because I think the Texans, if Bobby Slowick gets hired as a head coach, which seems likely, the Texans would probably want to promote Gerard Johnson. Am I saying his name? Yeah, Gerard Johnson. I keep mixing up with Jones. Gerard Johnson to their offensive coordinator, but the timing of that could get complicated because, as we talked about, they don't know whether it's not like they're going to elevate Gerard Johnson because they think Bobby's going to get the job, because what happens when he doesn't? And then it's very awkward. So Gerard is in this situation where he could take an OC job, but then what happens when the Texans now need an offensive coordinator? It's really kind of confusing, and it does throw a wrench into the timeline. But yeah, Gerard Johnson is the only real new name we know about that they've requested to interview.
Little Texas A&M connection there. Little Texas A&M connection there for DA.
Yes, there were a couple of Texas A&M names that I think are interesting. But yeah, he went to Texas A&M. I don't know if he ever coached at Texas A&M. He did not, but he played for several teams in the NFL. I'm going to go, and then several teams that are not in the NFL. I'm just going to go down this list because I think it's funny. Starting in 2011, he was with the Hartford Colonials, then the Philadelphia Eagles, then the Arizona Rattlers, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Sacramento Mountain Lions. We're only up till 2012. This is a year. Seattle Seahawks in 2013, Chicago Bears from 2013 to 2014, then the Montreal Alouettes. We're through 2014 now. This has been 3 years. The Baltimore Ravens in 2016. So he was out of football in 2015. Then he was with the Ravens in 2016. Then the Cowboys also in 2016. And then his most recent as a player was the YCF Grit. I don't even know where that is, in 2018. Let's see. Your Call Football was an interactive competition in which participants called plays in real time for a series of live exhibition American football games with players, some of whom have played in the NFL and CFL. It lasted 1 year. And it did not go anywhere.
Make it the positive spin I'll put on all that is the man loves football so much he's willing to do anything to play, he's matter where. Right.
He's a lifer. I'll give you that much. But yeah, he spent 22 as the assistant quarterbacks coach in Minnesota. So that's another kind of connection because Kevin O'Connell fell off the I always forget, is it the McVay or Shanahan tree? Let's see. Kevin O'Connell. He came off of McVay. So he was with the Rams. He was their offensive coordinator in 2020, 2021. So you kind of double up there, right? Maybe you're not on one tree or the other, but you get a little bit of both because you get Bobby Slowick, who is from the Shanahan tree, and you get Kevin O'Connell, who is from the McVay tree, and then they kind of all coalesce. So that's, if the Saints are looking at it, and that's kind of the question is, do you want to go with a more established offensive coordinator who has done it before, has called plays, has maybe didn't succeed in their first role and learn from their mistakes? Or do you want to go with the young guy who is kind of more of a wild card? And I'm kind of two minds about it, but personally, with a lot of the headwinds you're going to be flying into, I'd kind of like someone who's done this before. So that's where you are. But yeah, the other guys, Dan Pitcher, we talked about in the last episode. and Zach Robinson, again, McVay guys. So
yeah, like you mentioned, that's how I feel with Johnson too. It's like, okay, yeah, nice young up and comer. I see the vision there, but the fact that he's never done it before, kind of a little bit of a turnoff, and maybe you need to get more experience. Like you said, if he can elevate in Houston to an OC there to get some reps, I guess you would say. But I don't want the Saints to be his first offensive coordinating gig.
I mean, I think it really just depends on how much he kind of blows you away in the interview process, right? Like if he shows up and just you just kind of leave like, wow,
right? This is what Derek Carr and this offense needs.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. I'm just saying, like, if I had my pick, it would be someone who's been there. The guy I'm kind of surprised they haven't lined up for an interview is Greg Olsen, the Seahawks quarterbacks coach, because obviously he's available. He's been an offensive coordinator before. He is a McVay guy, and he's also worked with Derek Carr before. So, like, it seems odd to me they're not interviewing him. Maybe it didn't go well with Carr. Maybe that's why, maybe they asked Derek about Greg and he was like, this is not the commentator, Greg Olsen. This is a coach. But there's a few others, the only guy from the Lions that seems interesting is Tanner Engstrand. He's their pass game coordinator now. He's obviously not a McVay guy, not a Shanahan guy. So you'll have to see. But I also think that the Lions are going to be the next team that starts to get plucked away from.
You got to say, like, Goff, never been a huge fan of his, but he looks really damn impressive this season. And obviously in that postseason matchup against the Bucs, he was just throwing dimes. It was amazing to see. And I was like, this is Jared Goff.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a number 1 overall pick, so it's not like you turned, nothing
right.
Something. He's been to a Super Bowl, right? He was decent. He was good with the Rams. He wasn't great with the Rams. But no, I think like that's, Ben Johnson. He's one of the hottest names in the head coaching cycle because of what he's done for Jared Goff. Shane Waldron was one of the first guys to get hired as an offensive coordinator because not necessarily because the Seahawks were incredible on offense, but because he was able to take Geno Smith and turn him into a starting quarterback or a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, right? So that helps. And I think anyone associated with the Lions passing game right now is going to be a name you look at. And it's also because of a culture thing. Like Dan Campbell has built the type of culture in Detroit that you want pieces of. And so, I think that's why it's difficult to maintain success over long periods of time, because when you're good for a long period, your coaches start getting plucked away. So I think Tanner Engstrand is an interesting one. He's a guy, for example, that you wouldn't have heard previously in terms of Saints requesting to interview them, because you can't interview coaches in the playoffs prior to the divisional round. He hasn't been requested yet. I'm just saying that's a name that I wouldn't be surprised if they take a look at. The other guy I'm really interested in, and it's going to be a question of what the Bills do, is Joe Brady. Joe Brady is their interim offensive coordinator. And I think in order to prevent him from being interviewed, the Bills would have to announce that he is their full-time offensive coordinator. They would have to make that official. But I'm not entirely sure how that works. I'm not entirely sure if they have to do that first or if they get some time, because he has been interviewed in the head coaching cycle. I think he was with the Falcons. He got an interview. But if the Bills decide, no, we're going to go a different direction with offensive coordinator, he's not going to stay on that staff. He's going to get hired either as an offensive coordinator somewhere. There's way too many openings. And I think the Saints should take a long look at him if they can. I mean, this is a guy who did struggle with the Panthers. He was the offensive coordinator with Matt Rule. It didn't go well, but I don't see that as disqualifying. I just think the Panthers suck. Like, I think the Panthers have failed at so many different things. And I think what you saw with the Bills this year was interesting. He's obviously got familiarity with the Saints. You would call him a Sean Payton. You would call him a member of the Sean Payton tree. And so if he is available to be interviewed, and again, I would expect the Bills to keep him and elevate him to the full-time offensive coordinator. But if he's available, I want them to take a long look at Joe Brady too.
Yeah, it's kind of almost, going back to, you say, with Joe Brady and his run with the stint with the Panthers, you kind of chalk it up with, well, Dennis Allen's run with the Raiders. It was such a dysfunctional kind of organization. Yes, it happened, and obviously it's a part of your quote-unquote permanent record, but I'm really not going to hold it against you at all.
No, you have to prove that you learned from it.
Sure, right.
If you do the same thing again, then and that's a lot of people are saying about Dennis Allen is just doing the same thing again, except he never got to 9-8 with the Raiders. So
just saying. You
can look at it and say he has gotten better year over year. So I don't know, and it's something that's why the situation is tenuous. That's why a guy with some offensive coordinator experience walking into that building for the first time would make me feel a little better about it. That's not to say a guy in his first year as an OC can't get it done. But I think that if you were starting, that's why, when you brought in Dennis Allen, I wouldn't have hated to see you pair him with a first-time offensive coordinator in year one.
Right.
In year three, it's a lot more difficult because you want to allow that guy, if you're hiring a first-time offensive coordinator, you can't expect him on day one to not have any kind of learning curve. And in year one under a head coach, you can say, like, it's okay. You're going to get some stuff wrong. We're going to figure it out. We're going to get better over time. You can't really do that this year. And so I think that narrows down your pool of guys you could potentially bring in. A few other names that I don't necessarily think they're going to look at, but could, David Girardi, he's the Kansas City quarterbacks coach. I don't think you're going to look at guys like Brunell or Gracie. I think if you're going to hire someone, you're going to hire someone who's going to kind of make over things. And Cliff Kingsbury is interesting. He was kind of in the conversation for the Bears offensive coordinator job. They obviously you're going to go with Waldron, but he's an interesting name. He played here, right? He he was a backup quarterback for the Saints way back when. There are some pictures. And then you got other guys like Kellen Moore, Eric Bieniemy, guys that have done it multiple times. If you're just trying to, if your plan is, if some of these other hires fall through, and you're like, yeah, but we can pair Dennis Allen with an experienced offensive coordinator who, has some skins on the wall, as Bobby would say, who you trust to be able to command a room. Those are guys who I could see kind of working their way into the conversation later. But right now we only have those four names, which, as we mentioned, Shane Waldron is expected to be hired by the Bears, and then Dan Pitcher, Gerard Johnson, Zach Robinson.
Yeah. We heard from Mickey Loomis, obviously, too, saying that they're in no rush to do this. It's going to be a pretty, I don't want to say long process, but a methodical, thought out, really well researched one. I just think, the Saints won't be done till the divisional round, to this championship weekend is even done. There's going to be names on these teams that are involved right now that they're interested in, obviously.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think this is the week that it starts heating up significantly in terms of you're getting a much closer, you're getting a much clearer picture of like who are the finalists, right? And then maybe next week when you get into the break between the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl, you'd like to see them make a hire. I think you want, the Saints view the Senior Bowl as such an important scouting event. I think that's right. Probably where I would look at and say this is where you would want to have someone hired by then. Just so you can have an idea of what your offense is going to look like, what positions maybe that you need to make some changes at. Like if your blocking schemes are going to change, do you need to look at, offensive linemen who can do different things, or, you get the idea, right? Like tight ends. If you're really considering a quarterback at 14, a guy like Michael Penix is there. So that's someone you probably take a long look at, but Bo Nix is also there. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that like the Bears hiring Shane Waldron is early in that process, obviously, and that's kind of the situation that like the Saints weren't going to rush. So like, and this is where Mickey is, right? Like the Saints weren't going to be like, oh, the Bears are going to hire Shane Waldron. We need to rush and get out ahead of them so we can hire this guy. No. They're going to take their time. They're going to make sure that they interview everybody. And I don't think, like, again, you're talking about the team with the number one pick in the draft and with multiple first round picks. It's like you're trying to compete with a team that can say, you want Caleb Williams? We can go get him. That's tough.
and obviously I think for even, obviously Dennis Allen, you look at him right now, he's got to make the right choice here because this could be his last freaking rodeo as a head coach. Who knows if you get another shot after this one.
You don't.
So it's like, I got to make this work.
There is no third chance for Dennis Allen unless things, obviously if things turn around this year and he goes, 11, 12 wins and makes the playoffs, but like at that point you wouldn't be getting fired. Right? Like, so there's no third chance. If this thing goes badly, and like he gets fired, you're a defensive coordinator for the rest of your career. This is your last chance to get a head coaching gig.
I definitely, like as you mentioned there, it's like he obviously would have to go back to being a DC first, but who the hell knows? Yeah, I would think though too that you're going to be remembered for your failures with the Raiders and then the Saints. People want to give Josh McDaniels a job. Supposedly he might be the OC with Bill Belichick in Atlanta.
Well, no, he could be an offensive coordinator. Sure, but no one's hiring Josh McDaniels. Remember when Josh McDaniels got hired by the Colts and then just like never showed up?
Yes.
Like it's wild. Like people say like Dennis Allen, whatever, probably didn't deserve another head coaching job. And it at least made sense why they went to him. Like he was the internal candidate that they knew incredibly well and felt comfortable with. Whereas like the Raiders just hired Josh McDaniels, which like he also did not deserve another head coaching job. And like, the Colts, he literally just backed out on a job with the Colts. And the Raiders still hired him. I don't know why people keep hiring Josh McDaniels, but if he shows up with Bill Belichick, Bill Belichick will probably just say, yeah, Josh, come coach my offense. Why the hell not? It's worked before. It's worked so well that he's got multiple head coaching jobs because of it. Thank you, Tom. We should start calling it the Tom Brady coaching tree and not so much the Bill Belichick coaching tree.
There you go. Now that's the key right there for sure.
That's become my new theme is talking shit about Bill Belichick. I don't know why.
Because you realize we're going to have to be facing him twice a year.
Well, it kind of doesn't look like that anymore. It kind of looks like the Falcons backed out of that in terms of they're interviewing everybody.
Their net is wide and long.
I feel like every time I go into Twitter, it's a new head coach graphic. Which, can we stop the graphics? Do I need a graphic that says we interviewed Bill Belichick for a second time?
We've completed the second interview as head coach. Okay, cool. You don't see the Saints doing that shit.
I don't. Like, that's so strange to me. Like the Chargers do it too now. Is that like an NFL thing? Did the NFL say you have to? It's like teams wanted to make it very clear that they were complying with the Rooney Rule, but they knew they could not only tweet out a thing that said we've interviewed Eric Bieniemy or whoever, and so they now have to do it for everybody because of that. It's just strange because like I don't remember this being a thing before, but now it's like there's someone in the graphics department and the social media department who's like full-time job is like, oh, we interviewed this guy, make me a graphic. So strange.
No, and you would think like some things you would want to keep on the low, and you having a second interview with someone, I don't think you'd want to broadcast to everyone. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't have to tell anybody,
right?
Are you doing it for the attention? I don't know.
TMI, too much information.
It's just strange. I don't know. It's annoying to me. But it does seem thirsty when you're like, we interviewed this guy again. Are you guys cool about that? Yeah.
We just completed our second interview. Okay.
And it sucked. Tell us how it went. That's what I want. If you're going to tweet about it, give us your feedback on how the interview went. Then we could talk.
It was a successful interview. They completed
our second interview with Bill Belichick, and he showed up in flip-flops.
And a 28-3 shirt.
We did it over Zoom, and he did not put pants on.
Yeah, I've seen that too. It's like, oh, so-and-so, I don't know which team it was, honestly, had a Zoom interview for their job. And I'm not sure if it was head coach. I think it was OC. But still, that seems to me way too impersonal. It's like, I'm not getting this job if I'm just doing it over a freaking Zoom call.
No, I mean, I think that's how a lot of the early interviews go. Like that's what, like, so I think
Like a little feeler outer kind of deal.
Huh? Yeah. Well, I mean, especially if this team is still coaching, or this, if like, for example, if you're interviewing someone this week and they're in the playoffs, you're not having an in-person interview with whoever, right? Like that's almost impossible. These teams are so busy right now. They got a playoff. They got a chance to go to the Super Bowl.
Playoffs.
Anyway, have you seen that new Jim Mora commercial with Kevin Hart?
Plenty of times. Yes, it's on like a loop.
Man, they really went for it with that one. I don't even think like Jim Mora knows what DraftKings is.
And then Kevin Hart's like, "Who's calling these press conferences?" Mike, well, DraftKings is.
Yeah, DraftKings. One more thing. Ryan Nielsen sounds like he's getting hired by the Jaguars.
Yeah, out from the ATL after 1 year.
Yeah, poor guy. And so the Jaguars can now expect to not get any turnovers. That seems to be the theme with Ryan. I like Ryan, but his
I don't know. But now Caden Ellis and David Onyemata are like, "What the hell? We came over here for Nielsen."
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. They'll probably end up in Jacksonville pretty soon.
Right.
Let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back, play the interview we did with Scott Shanle. Scott Shanle on Friday. He had some interesting things to talk about. He does a lot of the pregame, postgame stuff for the Saints. I appreciate that Scott is hanging around because I think he's a good NFL mind to kind of chat with. He and Lance Moore. I think, between he and Lance Moore, one of those guys is like, should be on TV calling games. You know what I mean? It seems like they both have the
presence, the knowledge,
je ne sais quoi, if you will.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I know Lance does do stuff for local TV. It's amazing.
He does analysis. I want to see him as a color commentator, but I guess that's Deuce does that. He used to do that for the SEC network, but it's so time consuming that I know it was a burden. But yeah. Anyway, we'll come back. You'll hear from Scott, and then in the final segment, we will hit you with our positions of need breakdown as promised. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow him at Steve Geller WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. If you haven't subscribed, do that. Please leave a rating, leave a review. Hit us up on YouTube at WWL Sports. Ring the bell, and we will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak alongside Steve Geller. And as promised, let's get into that interview with Scott Shanle. We did it on Friday, hit on several topics around the Saints, the offensive coordinator search, head coach interviews, all that good stuff. So here's that.
Your initial reaction to the Pete Carmichael news, Saints moving in a different direction, someone that very well being on that Super Bowl squad. Was it time, though? It just felt like it, I think, with everybody that there needed to be a change there.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just the nature of the business. Pete is one of the greatest people I've ever been around and one of the most loyal people. He's been there since 2006, and I know he turned down a ton of jobs and a lot of job interviews because New Orleans is where he wanted to be. So from that aspect, it's sad just knowing that he chose to stick around as long as he did. But like I said, it's the nature of the business. You saw it when Coach Payton was there. I mean, Coach Payton every few years turned over the staff. That's just how it was. And he made some of his best friends really mad at him for a couple of years. I mean, he moved on from Joe Bitt, who was my linebackers coach. Those guys went all the way back to the 80s when they worked with the Philadelphia Eagles as assistant coaches. So it's just part of the business, and you have to do it to keep things from getting stale. I truly believe that. Sometimes the same message over and over doesn't quite resonate the same as when you have something new and exciting.
As you look at this, what is your kind of early leaning in terms of how you do replace that guy? Do you think they go with an established name? Do you think you go with an up-and-coming name? How much change do you think there's going to be? What is your early read on that situation?
First thing I think of is when you invest the type of money you invested in the quarterback, you're probably looking at an offense that's going to fit him or an offense that he's had success in the past. He's always kind of been a West Coast offensive guy. Even at the end of this year, once he became a little healthier and he became familiar with the offense, the timing was there. So I think he fits really well into a West Coast offense. So that'd be my first choice, sticking with a West Coast principled offense. But at the same time, I think the West Coast principles are in a lot of offenses. When you look at the Shanahan tree of guys and the McVay tree of guys, there's a ton of West Coast principles in that. And I would not be opposed to grabbing somebody from that coaching tree, because when you look at that offense throughout the league, I mean, look in Houston, Bobby Slowick was part of that Shanahan tree. You look at McDaniel in Miami, there is a lot to say about that particular style of the West Coast offense and how much success it's had in the NFL.
Scott, we got the word that the Patriots are going to be interviewing Saints linebackers coach Michael Hodges for their defensive coordinator gig under Gerard Mayo. Just your thoughts on what Hodges has brought to this group. Definitely a lot of high praise in this room, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at just the consistency of that position group, and I think a lot of times people will say, well, yeah, DeMario Davis, but DeMario Davis played some of his best football when he got to New Orleans. And DeMario, the last few years, even aging and where he is in his career, he doesn't miss a beat. And I think a lot of times people don't give the position coaches enough credit. The guys who on a day-to-day basis are handing out these tips and these sheets and bringing into to the meeting room and putting down in front of guys saying, hey, this is what I found last night. Their right tackle is tipping off plays, or their tight end is tipping off plays, or when they get in this formation, here's what they're doing. So the position coach can really help a person have success. I know I took my game to a whole new level when I got to New Orleans and I had Joe Vitt as my linebackers coach. He was able to reach me in a way that I hadn't had. And so I think it just speaks volumes when you look at him. And Pete Warner's played some really good football in spurts. And if Pete could stay healthy, I think Pete can still really be a really, really good four-down linebacker in this league. And he can cover guys in the flat. And the game has become a two-linebacker system anymore. But even you go to Zach Bond is not an off-the-ball linebacker, but when he got up on the line of scrimmage and was playing in some of those pressure packages, he did really good too. So I think he's done a great job in that room.
Scott, I saw you tweeting about this, and it is interesting. You know, is this the era of the linebacker head coach? You know, because you just had D'Amico Ryans, Antonio Pierce got the job, Gerard Mayo, obviously in New England, and it is interesting because you look at it, it's like, oh, usually you see former quarterbacks. You know, there's certain positions that tend to gravitate toward coaching, but you know, you've seen these kind of linebackers take center stage. I don't know, is it an energy thing? I'm just curious. You know, what is it about linebackers that you think kind of gravitates towards that role lately?
Yeah, I love it. Obviously, playing linebacker, I just think at that position, it's a unique position because just playing the game, you have to be extremely versatile. You have to be able to take on 320-pound linemen. You have to be able to cover receivers in the slot, cover running backs. So you're constantly doing things that are out of your element based on your size or your speed. But more than that, it's about communication. At linebacker position, you're constantly talking to everybody around you. You're in the middle of the defense. You're relaying coverage calls with the DBs. You're talking to the defensive linemen, getting them in the right gap. And so I think as a linebacker, just the communication part of the game comes natural. And I really like it because you've seen for years where it's a young man's offensive game or quarterback coaches are getting jobs. And D'Amico Ryans, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes. And then Antonio did a great job in his interim role, and now Mayo in New England. And heck, I'll even go, I know he's not a linebacker, but Dan Campbell in Detroit. So I love seeing all these guys who used to be players. I just think the way the current player is now, they really trust and relate to guys who went through the battle.
Dan Campbell might not have played linebacker, but he's a linebacker at heart, I think.
Yeah, he is. I played with Dan in Dallas, and tell you what, Dan Campbell at the time, if you would have told me, watching, we used to call him Triple H, the WWE wrestler, because he would walk around with that bottle of water, and he would do Hanklings in the weight room. He would spit water out. And he was always had a dramatic flair about him, and I never thought he'd be a head coach, but he is a heck of a head coach, and he's got that program rolling.
You know, the Packers are on the schedule again next year, so I think it's interesting because I think the Jordan Love we saw in week 3, while he showed some flashes, he made some plays. Obviously, they won that game, but I don't think this Jordan Love we're seeing now looks anything like the Jordan Love at the beginning of the season. I think he was learning, he was taking his lumps, but I do think it's interesting. Like, you need time as a quarterback, and the Packers are as good as anyone at making sure you have plenty of time to develop before they throw you into the fire. But I'm curious, what have you seen from him over the course of the season? Because it seems like, you know, a guy who mid-season there was definitely a lot of doubters in terms of maybe long-term in that role. And now, but what have you seen from Jordan from that week 3 game to now?
He's been remarkable. And the biggest thing is the game has slowed down to him immensely. And every player, you know, I certainly remember it was probably a year 2 or 3 for me. And you kind of remember when it starts to click, when the game actually finally slows down, because it's so hectic, it's so fast. And the game against the Dallas, he just looked like he had Dallas's defense in slow motion, and he knew exactly where all the open windows were going to be. He made all the right reads. But honestly, getting Aaron Jones back really has made that offense go. Aaron Jones is an outstanding running back. He can do it all. I think having that threat and that running game helped take some pressure off of him for making all the plays as well. And he's doing it with probably the youngest wide receiver core in the NFL. So I give Jordan Love a ton of credit because he has come a long way since, like you said, in the middle of the season where there were a lot of doubters. But everybody else around him has really elevated their play, and they believe in him. And to me, once you believe that you have the guy at quarterback, everybody's game just goes to another level.
Scott, back to a Saints question for me. Just curious, looking ahead, going into next season, obviously got to get the coaching, offensive coordinators, and assistants all squared out. But for you, what is the biggest area of need for this team going into next year? I know a lot of talk has been about the offensive line. Are you feeling that way as well?
Yeah, I am. You're asking that question, and I thought, do I want to give this boring answer? Because fans hate when you say offensive line. Fans are like, please don't draft an offensive line or defense line. But that's where championships are won. And if you think about 3 or 4 years ago when this Saints team was really rolling, and I think the Saints arguably had the best offensive line in the league. You had a healthy young Ramczyk and Armstead and all those guys, and you just controlled games. Every week you rolled into, it didn't matter if it was home or away, and you knew you could run the ball and you could play great defense. That's how you win 11 games, 12 games in a season. So if an outstanding lineman is there early in the draft, I think it's hard to pass up because you need that. You need to kind of replenish along that offensive line. But at the same time, I believe this team is still in a position where you can draft the best position available. You don't have to reach. You don't have to reach and fill a position because you just don't have anybody there. It's going to be interesting. I think the Saints need to get back to being a little more aggressive. You think back when Sean was there and there were tons of trades in the draft or there were trades in the offseason to kind of bolster positions. I think doing that and letting everybody know, like Mickey said the other day, I got to let everybody know you're not comfortable. Don't get comfortable. I think the way you do that is you make trades, you bring guys in, you make some blockbuster trades, and you shake things up. And how you think that usually gets everybody's attention?
Yeah, and this isn't even a question, but I do think it's an interesting point. Like everyone wants to talk about that 2017 draft. It's like, wow, this is a great draft. You got Alvin Kamara, you got Marshawn Lattimore. Well, another guy you got was Ryan Ramczyk, and he was the final pick of the first round. You got that pick. I think it was the Jimmy Graham. No, it was the Brandon Cooks trade. And when people look at this team, and it's like, well, why isn't this offense as consistent as what you saw in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020? Well, one of the biggest themes of those 4 years was that both of your tackles, there was never a question. Those were stud offensive tackles week in, week out. You had Teron Armstead, Ryan Ramczyk. And now you have Ryan Ramczyk with a knee that is not doing him any favors. On the left side, you're talking about, who knows, is it James Hurst, is it Andres Pete, is it Trevor Penning? To me, that's the biggest difference. And I think a big part in what's prevented them from finding consistency on the offensive side of the ball.
There's no question. Absolutely, I agree. I think one of the things that hampers you more than anything in a draft is when you invest your top draft picks in big guys that don't work out. Marcus Davenport, really good player, explosive, had the size, had all the measurables, couldn't stay healthy. But when Marcus was healthy and he played more than 2 or 3 games in a row, he made plays. And Peyton Turner's had the injury bug on him, and Penning, they're trying to figure out what position he can play. Anytime you miss on draft picks on big guys up high, it's hard to find 320, 330-pound guys roaming the earth with nimble feet who can do the things these guys can do. And that's why it goes back to Bill Parcells always used to say it. He's always going to take big, talented guys early because it's harder to find those type of people. So I've always just been a believer. If you miss early in the draft on big guys, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, it's hard to cover up for those mistakes.
All right. Thanks again to Scott Shanle for hanging out, talking about all that good stuff. I do think it's interesting with all these head coaching hires and the linebacker head coach. It seems to be kind of, I think we go in waves, right? You go in waves, you go in waves, you get all these like nerd offensive coordinator guys going in and they revamp all these offensive systems. And then you go in waves where you get guys like Mike Singletary and you got Gerard Mayo and even I think he's right. Like Dan Campbell is a linebacker in his soul. Whether he played tight end in the NFL, but he's always been that bite your kneecaps off guy. And I think DeMeco Ryans, right? I think that you're getting into a way of like this kind of mode now where you need that. Yeah, especially with the way that social media is, and there's so many different things kind of capturing people's attention. I just think having that commanding presence as a head coach might be more important now than it was 5-8 years ago when, it was a lot easier to tune out a lot of the noise. I don't know. Maybe that's me, but it does seem like a trend. It does seem like a lot of these kind of, I wouldn't say yay, rah, rah coaches, but more intense, like emotional coaches Antonio Pierce and guys like that. It just seemed like that's resonating a little more now. Well, but at the same time, the Kyle Shanahans, the Sean McVays are still doing the job. They're getting the job done. So I don't know. We'll see. But I did think that was an interesting kind of point that we talked about there.
It's just kind of odd too. You start feeling really old when you start seeing these former players now ascending into not just even assistant coaching roles, and it's like head coaching jobs. You're like, damn, I remember when kind of thing when he was playing, blah blah blah. So, but yeah, tons of congrats. The freaking Raiders, man, they actually did the right thing for once.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in them for not doing the wrong thing. All right. But I mean, it's about time, right? Like they should have done this with Rich Bisaccia a few years back, and they completely, not only did they not do the right thing, they hired the worst possible coach. So at least they're kind of learning from their mistakes. But yeah, it is interesting, and as you kind of go into it. So yeah, and I agree with that because in the last few years I've reached the age where when people start talking about, oh, that guy's too old, he needs to retire, they're literally the same age as me. Like I'm 33 right now, and we're talking about Cam Jordan being too old, and it's like this
washed up old man, right?
Last year was Mark Ingram, right? And everyone's like, oh, he's so old, and I looked down and I was like, oh, he's 32. Okay,
what? Huh?
Like, oh. Cam is like a month older than me. Like we're like the same age. I think he was born in February 1990, and I was born in March. Let's see. I need to double check that. Which Cam is like hanging out in like some other country right now. Oh, I'm sorry. No. July 10th, 1989. So he's like almost a full year older than me. He's 34 now, but yeah. So
he's also been beaten down by the NFL.
Yes, it's true. It's true. But he's made a lot more money.
That's also true. Very true.
He's worth significantly more than I am. He's going on these international trips, having a good time, and he's going to be I'm sure, we talk about Lance Moore and Scott Shanle, and they're, it's only a question of where Cam Jordan's going to be broadcasting whenever he does retire.
Man, he's already doing like a podcast with the NFL Network, so I think he's got like a job built in.
Yeah, he's going to be a play-by-play commentator somewhere. It's not play-by-play, color commentator somewhere. It's just a question of which station. It's and when he decides to do it, must be nice. When you're like, I'm going to retire whenever, but then I'll be like this guy.
But hey, since anyone that meets Cam from the first time right off the jump, you just knew he was. I was excited. I just remember when he got drafted, his initial interview was like, oh man, he's going to be a ton of fun. It's been a great, obviously, run all over these years. And yeah, you just see now that, man, this guy is poised and perfect for some kind of media role, and definitely looking forward to seeing what Cam does. If it's calling games, that'll be freaking awesome.
Yeah, every couple of years I'll rewatch The League, and whenever I get to the episode with Cam Jordan in it, I laugh because he's like, it's Cam Jordan and Jordan Cameron, the tight end, and there's like a bit where they're trying to figure out which one is which. And I think the guy can't do it. Yeah, it's funny. And he looks so different. He's got like the flat top. It is very funny. He's also like a
montage of the different Cam styles of hair throughout the years. It's quite impressive.
So I was gonna say, like, I want to get like that would be a great poster, right? Yeah. Like a Saints poster of like just all the Cam Jordan headshots, because they're so distinctive. Like for a while he was like he had the Fu Manchu going, and he was a pirate one year. Anyway,
whatever gets him back to being a sack monster, hopefully for next season.
Sack monster, yeah. And that's a good segue. We're going to talk about a lot of these positions that you could make moves on. Defensive end's an interesting one to me. So let's get into it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. Subscribe. Thanks again to Scott Shanle for hanging out with us clowns and shooting the shit, if you will. But we'll be right back, get through the positions of need, kind of dip our toes into the water of the draft and all the scouting that's going to happen, because we're going to have to get into we're going to have a mock draft coming at you soon, and it's going to be wrong. Get ready. Get ready for that. But all right, this is Inside Black and Gold. Stick around. we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Steve, I trimmed my beard. Can you tell?
You needed you had it all nice and bushy for the freeze.
Yeah.
And now that it's warming up, you can trim it down.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I think it was Fletcher Mack. I didn't realize how wild and unkempt my beard had become until like Fletcher, I think at the facility like a week or two ago, was like, Jeff, your winter beard is coming in nicely. And I was
Your
like,
winter beard.
my winter beard.
Meaning you look like you've been in the Revenant. Please shave.
But that was the moment where I'm like, oh, people are commenting on it now. I should probably do this. I talk on the radio. It doesn't matter what I look like.
Exactly.
I can look completely homeless. It's only the people on YouTube who actually know what I look like on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, now my neck isn't. Although it is still cold. It was like 30 degrees this morning, so we'll get into it. I had free time, so I did it anyway. I needed people.
I saw what the wild weather warm up coming this week is all like in the 60s, and I was like, really? Can it stay here?
Yeah, the winter lasts like a week here, but we'll see. I am glad I got my Pelicans Mardi Gras hat, so I'm gonna do the rest of this podcast in this hat.
That'll keep you warm.
This will keep me warm. I mean, I'm looking forward to wearing this at Mardi Gras because it's going to be on theme and it'll keep me warm. But we'll go. And so this segment, this is Inside Black and Gold. We're going to talk about the Saints, actually. This is not like a men's grooming podcast, at least not yet. But we're going to talk about positions of need. And I went through this morning and I kind of broke down each position. I did include a position called the Taysom. We don't need to worry about that one. They're in good shape at the Taysom. But I only did that because I'm not including him in the tight end conversation. Now, we can include him in the tight end conversation, and I am interested to see whenever they hire an offensive coordinator, one of my first questions will be, how do you intend to use Taysom Hill? Because you can't guarantee, it's an interesting conversation because you're going to hire an offensive coordinator, but you're not going to hire an offensive coordinator and say you have to use Taysom Hill in the very specific way we have been using Taysom Hill, and if you don't, you're gone. No, you have to give him the option. Like it's his offense. Does he think the best option is to run QB power 12 times a game? I don't know, but that's going to be a question he's got to answer. So I'm not including Taysom Hill in the tight end conversation, but he might be if the head coach does not like the idea of taking a starting quarterback off the field and you say, you're tight end now.
Yeah. And you do need where does Taysom fit in except just his own category? Really nowhere, because he's not your backup quarterback. He's not a tight end. He's not a running back. He just kind of does it all wherever you need him at that point.
Yeah, I mean, he could be your backup quarterback. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the benefits of keeping Pete Carmichael was you knew exactly what to expect in that regard. You knew exactly how he was going to use Taysom, and you didn't have to ask any questions. Now it's more of a question. So that's going to be something. But again, I don't think it doesn't really impact this. It's just me explaining when we talk about the tight ends why I'm not really including him in that because we don't know yet. But so the way I broke this down was kind of green. Green means go. Green means you're all good. Kind of like the alert system. So green, no alert. You don't really need to make any changes. Then you're gonna have yellow, which is like you may spend a premium asset, but you don't have to, right? Like I wouldn't mind to see these positions upgraded, but it's not mission critical. And then I have red alert, and there's only 3 positions, really 2 that I think it's like you need to do something here. Like if you go into next year with your roster the way it was, you're going to be in trouble. So the first one, and it's going to annoy some people, but you got to be realistic about it.
Now, wait a minute. Is this just you're looking at draft or also free agency, or any kind of need? Both. Really? Both. Okay.
And mostly draft, but you could also handle it in free agency. The thing is, like, the Saints are never going to be the team that goes all in on free agency.
No, right.
So if you have a red alert position, it's typically not going to be able to be addressed in free agency alone. So, but I am like for example, linebacker. Put the question is, do you bring back Zach Bond? Because if you don't, then Sam linebacker is like, what the hell is going to play your Sam anyway? So that is part of the conversation. But I look at it more in free agency. I look at it more as in, are you bringing back your own players as opposed to going out and signing somebody as far as this is concerned? But so I'll just go through the greens first. And, the first position that is probably going to annoy some people again is quarterback. I don't think that you have to add a quarterback. I don't think that it's even like a situation where you feel like, you even have motivation to go at a quarterback. And to me, it's like, if it's not Jaden Daniels, I don't really want him. Or Drake May. Like, if one of those two guys falls outside of the top 5 and you can make a move up and go get him, then I'm interested. I'm listening. I'm in there. But outside of that, I don't see it. And I don't see. Even then, I don't know if the price would be right when you have all these other kind of needs or wants to spend so much to go get a quarterback. And it's not only because I think you got representative quarterback play out of Derek Carr and you're paying him and you're going to have him around for at least one more year, probably more. It's also like, I don't want to spend premium assets and go up and get a quarterback in a make or break year for my head coach, knowing that I do that. And then next year I'm hiring a head coach and it's like, well, where am I? Right. Like that's a tough situation to be in. And I don't know if it's like, you could really like a quarterback, but it's not a question of if he gets to your position, are you going to draft him? It's, are you going to spend the assets to go get him? And I don't think that works. And I think you're in a scenario where you ride it out with DA and Derek Carr, and that's what you're doing. And so if you're in a position next year where that worked out and you're drafting the tail end of the first round because you made the playoffs, then yeah, great. And if that doesn't work and it burns down and it goes down in flames, then next year you're probably going to be in a position to go draft a quarterback. So I don't think it makes sense to do that this year unless someone falls into your lap. So that's why I have them in green. And also you have Jake Haener, who should be able to be your backup. So I don't know. Like, again, it's like in the scope of this conversation, I don't look at it and say, man, quarterback, they got to go get a quarterback. I just don't.
Yeah, the thing is, too, it's like, do you really want to let Dennis Allen make all these moves, give up all these assets to get a quarterback he might not be around to be the coach for?
Oh, right, exactly. if you're in a situation where in 2025 you're going to a rookie, that means that everything went so terribly like this year that you don't see it worth continuing. And if that's the case, then I would want the next coaching staff to have an idea of who they're going to draft, right? So if the idea is you're making a play for the future, then I just don't think it fits this year. But we'll see, and like, if you go and you draft a quarterback in the 4th round again, then you're just kind of restarting that clock. And like, why did you go get Jake this year if you weren't going to give him a chance? So I just don't really see it. I don't think this is the year, but you'll find out. I think Jameis is gone, so maybe that does open up a roster spot. So you could potentially have that third quarterback. But I don't think this team wants to have to carry a third quarterback because they already have Taysom, who can be that emergency third quarterback. So anyway, that's my green. Do you have anything else you want to add there?
No, just the QB position. I'm with you. If you can't get a guy like Jaden, I'm really not that enamored with anyone else in this draft where it's like, it's worth taking a shot on. I mean, there might be that person, but I've seen even some mock drafts, they had the Saints getting Bo Nix, and that just doesn't appeal to me at all.
No, it's like, if you're going to get a high-end guy, go get a high-end guy, but right. I don't know. Otherwise, it seems like you're just adding a guy to add a guy. So the next few, okay, so defensive end, defensive tackle. I kind of both put these in the green situation. And defensive tackle, I feel pretty good about. You brought in Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard. They improved throughout the course of the year, I thought. Maybe didn't get the job done as much early in the year, but I think the run game in particular got better, at least run defense. And Brian Brzee is a guy who's just continuing to grow. I think you bring back Malcolm Roach, and we'll see from a rehab perspective. I think you bring back PJ Mustipher, and I think he's a guy who you kind of work at the tail end of that rotation. But I'm okay with it. Like, I don't think you need to spend a premium asset there. The bigger question is defensive end, and the reason it feels a little bit more important or urgent is the injuries, right? Like Peyton, but I like Peyton Turner. You don't really have a choice but to bring him back and hope for the best. Obviously, you can't bank on it in terms of him being healthy, because how the hell could you? But Isaiah Foskey is another guy who was injured, and you're going to bring him back. He was a 2nd-round pick, and you're talking about a kind of a rotation of Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Isaiah Foskey, Peyton Turner, and then Tano Passanio at the back end, and he can also work into your pass rushing scheme and as far as kicking into defensive tackle. So just in terms of numbers, I don't think that, at least this year, because you're tied to Peyton Turner for one more year, you're not picking up his option. It's just going to be tough for you to add a piece to that rotation. And the only reason you would is because you don't trust Peyton Turner to be healthy. So I don't know. I think you just kind of got to roll with it and see what happens. You might add a piece, you might add a guy, but I also think Zach Bond is going to be re-signed and works back into that role as that specialist pass rusher. So that helps. I just in terms of you're going to go into this draft, and unless someone falls to you that you're in love with, I don't think you're going to spend that 14. I kind of gauge it around that 14th pick or that second round pick. And at 14, it would have to be someone that you are obsessed with falling to you at 14. Because I do think you're in decent shape there, and you're going to want to spend it somewhere else. But the defensive end was on the fringe for me between green and yellow. It's probably the closest to yellow of these green positions for me.
No, I'm definitely right there with you, just because I do want to add at defensive end because of the question mark still with Peyton Turner, another Bobby Abearism. He's hell when he's well, but when is he well? That's the rarity with him, unfortunately. Hoping the kid can do, turn some things around and be more active, but we just can't bank on it. That's why I think, sadly, continuing to add at that spot is a necessity, even though we've seen a Davenport and, for what you want to say, Turner be unsuccessful high picks for them.
Yeah, I could see you adding to it. I just don't know if it's a premium asset you're spending on it, right? I could see there's a few positions.
Something amazing that was I can't believe so-and-so's still here kind of thing.
There's a few positions where it's 4th, 5th round. I think that's where you might target. I just don't think 1st, 2nd round is going to make sense. Just because you've spent so much on that position over the last few years, and you just you have 1 year here where it's okay, can Peyton get his head out of his ass and stay healthy, right? Can Isaiah show something, but we'll see. Either way, and we don't have to agree. I put that in the green, but if you want to put it in the yellow, you very much can. There's 2 more positions I have in green. One is wide receiver. I feel very good about wide receiver. I think on the offensive side of the ball, that's the position I feel the best about. I think you move on from Mike Thomas, but I just love the trio of Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry. I think their kind of varied skill sets is just perfect in terms of what you want. You have one guy who can take the top off. You have one guy who's an elite route runner who can get open in a phone booth. You have another guy who is 6'5" and can go up and make contested catches, and they can all do other things. I think Rashid proved this year he can run the whole route tree, and he's just going to get better at that. A.T. Perry can be a deep threat because you can throw him open. He can go make plays where other guys can't get to it. I just really like the build of that wide receiver room. And so you can add to it, you can add pieces, and there's players beyond them that you're going to want veterans. You're going to want a Lynn Bowden, right? Maybe you bring back a Keith Kirkwood, maybe you go sign a veteran that is, like an Adam Thielen type, like a guy that isn't going to get paid a ton, but you trust to kind of lead that room. I don't know. I feel good about that room, probably more so than any other position.
Yeah, it's something that that's another spot there, though. If somebody happens to fall to the Saints, that they'd be interested in, maybe not the first round, but I'd even consider second, third round, high as that.
I don't
just
have a third round pick.
Right. So a second rounder, even just to add to the threat and the dangerousness of this offense for Derek Carr. I'd love to see another piece besides Olave and Shaheed, really. And obviously, like you said too, we did see some development from Perry, but I could still see another number 1 type guy on this team. I honestly,
I don't think the not having the third round pick makes it tough for me.
Sure, right.
If they had a third rounder, I could see them spending a third rounder. I have a hard time seeing them go unless someone fell that you just love. Again, that's always the wild card of a really high grade on someone and they just drop down the board and you get a shot at
whatever,
them.
Right.
I have a hard time looking at that second round pick, knowing that you don't pick again until the 4th round and saying, yeah, they're going to go after a wide receiver here, when there's a lot of these other positions that would make more sense. But again, it's you're picking the best player. You're not picking the position. We're just kind of I'm just kind of setting this in my
Bar
brain so I can, yeah. The only other position I have in green, and it's very much on the fringe, is the interior offensive line. But the reason I have it in green is not so much about the position. It's about the fact that the tackles are so important to fix that you almost feel okay with if you end up with Hurst, McCoy, Ruiz, and those, like, you don't have to play James Hurst at tackle. I feel good about it. If you do have to play Hurst at tackle, then you got to do something at left guard. But that means you didn't bring back Pete. There's a lot of variables. But I feel okay about the interior offensive line. I'd like to see them assert themselves better in the run game, and I wouldn't mind adding a left guard that is a little bit more high yield than a James Hurst. But in terms of like gotta have it, I think that position group is okay.
O-line, it needs some kind of help, and I don't know if that's, for me, really where you want to go for the draft, just because you're still waiting for your first round pick and Trevor Penning to develop.
Well, see, I'm not talking about tackle. I'm talking about interior offensive line. I'm talking about guards and center.
Yeah. So you're saying they don't need tackle to address it all?
No, I'm saying they don't need a guard or a center.
Okay. So they need to address tackle. Yeah,
and one of the reasons that the interior line ends up in green for me is because they need to address the tackle position. So I'm separating that part, separating the offensive line into tackles and interior, like outside offensive linemen and inside offensive linemen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you.
But I agree completely that the tackle position is a problem. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we're getting onto yellow here. And this is where a bulk of the positions that I think need to be addressed are. The closest one to okay, in my opinion, is tight end. And we talked about this in the first segment, so we don't have to get into a ton. But, you look around the teams that are still playing and the teams that played into the postseason, and you just see, top end tight end, top end tight end, top end tight end, top end tight end. Even, the Ravens, they don't even have Mark Andrews, but he's a top end. He might be the best tight end, right? Like, in terms of fantasy stats, he's definitely up there in the top 3. And the Saints just don't have that. And, If Juwan Johnson didn't close the season the way he did, this would be a red alert position for me.
Yeah.
He did enough in the final 6 games that it's like, okay, maybe with the consistency with Derek Carr and with health, you can be that guy that we thought you might be able to be going into the season. But all that said, I'm not typically the guy who says go out in the first round and go grab a tight end. But man, Brock Bowers is just that guy. And you watch, wouldn't it be nice for the Saints to be the team that has the tight end you can't guard, right? Like, how many weeks this season did we say, man, the Saints might have won that game, but they couldn't guard TJ Hawkinson. They couldn't guard Sam Laporta. They couldn't guard, Cole Kmet. They won that game, but they still couldn't guard Cole Kmet, right? Like, it's so infuriating to have that happen week after week after week and never be the team that's like, yeah, you can't guard him. I don't know. So personally, if they wanted to go out and spend a premium asset on a tight end in this draft, I would be all for it.
No, and it appears we won't see Jimmy Graham again. He has flown out into the great abyss or wherever he was heading in his last Instagram post. We didn't see much of him anyway. It's a shame.
Got some touchdowns.
A couple touchdowns and a couple throws. I mean, that's all he really got.
6 catches, 6 passes all season, right? And then 5 of them were touchdowns, 4 of them.
But overall, hoping to see Juwan take that step we were expecting early on that he finished with. Like you said, it kind of ended on a nice high note there, which is great. But what's going to happen with Juwan going into next year? I'm still high on the guy. I'm convinced that had to be in that injury with him had to be really holding him back.
Well, I mean, week 17 was the Juwan that I thought we'd see. You don't need that every week, but you you got to get it sometimes, right? And you got it in week 17, and he had that monster game, and he took over that game,
right?
Even with the injury to his shoulder. And so, yeah, I mean, tight ends is tough because it's never going to be, I guess it can be a position where you put up the crazy numbers. Like if you're a George Kittle or a Zach Ertz, in his prime, or,
right.
Mark Andrews, you're talking about 1,300 yards, of Jimmy Graham with all these touchdowns, Rob Gronkowski. Like, it can be that. But you're settling for a Dalton Schultz type season, right? Like 60 catches, 8 to 900 yards, 8 touchdowns in that range. And you don't you haven't been able to get that. And it's been a long time since the Saints offense has been able to establish and dominate with the tight end position. And I'm tired of it. I want to see it. All the good offenses in the NFL have a tight end that they can take advantage of in big moments. And the Saints don't seem to have that. You could argue they lost as many games because of the tight end position this year as they won, because the Lions game, man, like, if not for that fumble in the first play of the game, that was a completely different game. So I don't know. Like, maybe you look at it and you say Juwan is the guy, but I'm still not sold on it.
No, you definitely need to add there for sure. You can't be completely bank on Juwan, unfortunately.
Yeah. So now running back is another position that I just think you can continue to add to.
Yeah.
I like Kendre Miller. I like what we saw in week 18. I think that makes you feel a little better about that situation going forward. I think you're still going to be with Alvin Kamara as your lead back next year, but how long can you continue to trust that? I think you're going to get into the mid rounds of this draft and maybe a 5th, 6th round pick. You're looking at a running back, a guy you can bring in and have him compete with Jamal Williams for that RB3 job. And, if Jamal comes in and looks different and wins that job, great, but I'm not giving it to him. And so I'm still looking at that, because I'm kind of treating this as, okay, if I feel like Kendre Miller can be my RB1 in a couple of years, who's the RB2? Who's coming in? And I'd like a young guy to be able to do that. So, I'm still kind of looking at that.
Yeah, I'm still looking for who's going to be that physical pound and ground guy, kind of guy. Besides Taysom, I didn't like what I saw Jamal Williams at all this season. I know he was dealing with some injuries as well, but when he was in, he just didn't look to be like that dominant physical guy you could rely on at the 1 yard line.
Agree completely. It didn't work.
Unless it's victory formation, and then hell, he's in the end zone.
It just did not happen the way you hoped. And again, maybe the injury slowed him down. I don't know, but I'm not looking at that and saying, I'm not drafting a running back because I have these 3 guys. Like, I still think that's a position you could add to. Now, we'll go through these next few quickly. So you're talking about the secondary, CB1 and 2. I only put this here because I think you're trying to trade Marshawn Lattimore. And so if you do that, then yes, you do need to add a cornerback, probably. Just in terms of depth, you always want to have depth. You could also just re-sign Ike Adam if you think you have you can afford to do that. There's a few ways that you could address this, but I think Alontae Taylor has to be your outside corner next year, or at least you put him in that position. And so if you do bring back Marshawn, if you don't trade Marshawn, then, I don't think you do need to add a player, but because you already have premium depth in Alontae Taylor there. But if you do trade Marshawn, and that's what your plan is, because that's going to happen after the draft, I think the way you approach the draft is probably going to be telling of what your plans are with Marshawn. But I feel good about it. So I'm not saying you have to add a piece, but if you're going to trade Marshawn, I think you're probably going to bring in a young corner.
Yeah, and I would I'm thinking you have Alontae, Paulson, and you really need to fill that slot role, because we saw that obviously Alontae Taylor was not that dude this year.
Foreshadowing. We'll get into that. So, the next position is strong safety, free safety. It's another one where it's kind of contingent on what you do with another guy. So I think you move on from Marcus May. I don't think you've gotten what you needed out of Marcus May. I don't think he's been effective. There was 1 week this year that he was healthy enough to play and they just didn't play him, right? Like, they had him inactive, and that's just so telling of the impact that they felt like he was having. He could have, he was healthy enough to play. They didn't even have him in uniform. Like, you could say, like, oh, well, he didn't get to go through practice. Yeah, so, like, Jordan Howden was sick and they didn't have him inactive. They just, I just don't think Marcus May is going to be back. And if not, and you go into it saying, okay, Jordan Howden is probably your starting safety opposite Tyron, but Tyron's 32, 33, right? Like, so I think that's a position where you probably do need to keep adding pieces. You don't necessarily need to do it early, but I'd like Jordan Howden was a 5th round pick. I think you're just continuing to throw darts at the safety position and trying to find guys that can be quality assets. And I think you probably bring back maybe an Abram, maybe an Ugo Amadi, maybe a Lonnie Johnson. But I think you're probably just trying to just fill out that kind of gamut of players there. So I have them in that. I have that position there too. But if you bring May back, maybe Marcus May.
Meh. I do think safety is, you have it as yellow or green.
Yellow.
Yeah, it's something that definitely needs attention, just because you mentioned questions with May and then the age with Matthew. And, you got to like what you saw from Howden rookie year, but you can't really still rely on it too much going into year 2. You do want to see, obviously, continued development there.
Yeah, and I just like pairing young guys with a Tyrann Mathieu. I think like young players who play next to Tyrann Mathieu for the first year or 2 years of their career will be better players than they would have been otherwise.
Oh, for sure.
I think that's important. It's like Caden Ellis isn't the player that he is today if he didn't play next to Demario Davis for 3 years. Just not. So I kind of feel like Tyrann, the same way about Tyrann. And speaking of that, like my last position is linebacker, Will Mike Sam. We went to this season, and that was a serious concern, is you don't have any depth at linebacker. What are you going to do at that position if Demario or Pete go down? Now, that really never became an issue, right? No, Demario hurt his knee, but he played through it. Pete missed a game, I think, but otherwise, you were okay with it. Now Nephi Sewell is probably not going to be ready to start next season, even if you keep him around. So you're going to need a body there. If you bring back Zach Bond, that simplifies it a little bit because you feel like he's your Sam linebacker. But I'd like to see somebody added. Maybe again, like it's like, okay, does it need to be a second rounder? Probably not. But you have DeMarco Jackson, you have some of these guys. I just think that's a position you have to consider in terms of Demario isn't going to play forever, I think. So I don't know. That's another position that I think you could add pieces. You don't have to add pieces, but I think you probably should.
Yeah. Thankfully, can you imagine that, say, Demario's injury did hamper him as much as it, like, Cam Jordan was affected this year? The Saints would have been miserable. Obviously, because we hear now basically Jordan playing on one leg, and I believe it. Obviously, we saw a huge dip in his numbers, very uncam-like. But I mean, obviously, with Demario Davis, he seems like this ageless wonder out there. But eventually, Father Time, doesn't stop for anybody, obviously, and it's going to catch up, and you got to be prepared. Pete Werner, we've seen some good things out of, but not 100,000% sold on him right now either.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, he's your starting will linebacker. It didn't go particularly well this season, right? But I'm not replacing him, but I do want to add some depth there.
And that's been a position. It's been a position going into this year, like you said, it was like, man, what the hell are they going to do at linebacker?
Yeah, well, I mean, we knew it was always like, okay, I feel good about Pete and Demario, but what happens if
afterwards
misses games? And you can't say, well, we didn't really have to worry about this year because this year is not relative to next year, right? Like that doesn't mean that no one's going to break their leg and suddenly you have to rely on the backup for an extended period of time. Look at the Bills. Like the Bills ended up in a situation in that playoff game where they were down to like Dorian Williams, a Tulane kid, as their kind of starting linebacker. And it's like, well, Dorian Williams, I think it was a 3rd round pick. I think he's a quality guy, but like, that happens. And so where are you? Like, where would the Saints have been if they ended up having to give significant reps to DeMarco Jackson, right? Like Nephi Sewell, who, when you gave him those chances. And, one guy we didn't talk about, Michael Hodges, the linebackers coach, is interviewing with the Patriots. It'll be interesting to see if he's still around, but he has developed guys. And that's probably your best argument you could make to me to why, you don't need to spend a premium asset on a linebacker is because you found these guys and developed these guys over the course of several seasons. But either way, I'd like to see you go find guys that you think you can develop. And so that's my last yellow position. So anything you need to add to that before we move on to the red alert positions?
No, it sounds good. What are we having? Red alert.
Well, the first position is really 2 positions, but it's right tackle and left tackle.
Okay.
And this becomes an even bigger concern because it's both. If it was one, you feel like, okay, we can go address one. We can find a way. If it's both, which you don't know if it's going to be both, but man, I don't know how you can look at Ryan Ramczyk right now and be like, well, we don't have to come up with a contingency for if he retires, right? Or at very least, if he's not as effective as he needs to be, right? So, I mean, you're looking at it and saying, man, We drafted a left tackle in the first round, and this is something Scott Shanle talked about. When you miss on those big guys in the first round, it really sets you back. And Trevor Penning, while the team is not saying that they're quit on him, like I think they're hoping that they can give him an offseason program and have him come back and develop and be that left tackle. I don't know how I don't think you can bet on it. So what are you going to do? Like, you got to get at least somebody who profiles as a left tackle. And, those are tough guys to find.
See, this is where it's like drafting. I don't know. I think you need somebody veteran here to bring in.
Yeah, well, right. So you're going to trust a rookie? Like, you already had trouble developing a rookie. And,
right.
And it's like at 14, it's not easy to find. Like, that's the premium left tackles usually don't get to that spot. Maybe they do this year because of the quarterbacks at the top, and because a guy like Brock Bowers probably goes in the top 10, which is not a position you typically see a tight end. A Marvin Harrison Jr. probably goes in the top 10. So that's 5 picks already that helps push some of the offensive line prospects down the board. So maybe you are able to get one of your top options, and that helps you at one of those positions. But one way or the other, you are not getting very far if you don't have left tackles. And maybe bring back Audacy Pete. Maybe, like my issue is his market might be a little steeper than you're able to swim in, right? Like the water that you're trying to go in might be a little too deep.
To think about.
It is, but it's like,
I know,
you're talking about a guy who can play left tackle and left guard, and a lot of teams like that. And so we'll see. But
no, and I mean, he gets a ton of crap from fans, and obviously
he doesn't get so much anymore.
No, what he was able to do when filling in at the left tackle spot, it was amazing. It was really amazing how the easy transition was for him, and how much better overall the O-line started performing.
I will say, I don't want to call it an easy transition, but I will say how easy he made it look, because that's not an easy transition, but he made it look like it was. And yeah, so if you can keep him around, that keeps that at least makes you feel a little better about it. Like, then you can go into the draft and say, okay, we feel like Audacy Pete can play left tackle if we need him. And if Trevor does play, like, show good enough, and we can kick Audacy to guard and have Hurst be the swing guy and maybe back up Trevor. That makes it a lot easier, because then you can maybe draft a right tackle prospect and have him as that contingency if Ryan Ramczyk can't go, or if Ryan can go but then gets hurt, or just his knee gives out on him, and you have that guy ready to plug in. That's, to me, the ideal scenario. But it's all going to come down to, man, is there a bidding war for Audacy Pete?
Ugh.
I don't know. Either way, that's going to be a huge position to watch. That is kind of your red alert position, because if you can't get Audacy Pete back, Trevor doesn't work out, Ryan retires. Yikes. Big yikes. Like, that could end your season before it starts. Like, genuinely, like, that's why it's a red alert situation. Because if the worst case scenario comes through at left and right tackle, which is what I just explained, even if you spend the 14 pick, you can spend your first 2 picks on tackles. It's still going to be a nightmare, because Derek Carr's not running around. You don't have a Lamar Jackson or a Josh Allen or somebody that can make these offensive linemen look better than they are.
Not at all.
You got a guy who needs, you saw him play better at the end of the season. It's in large part because he got pass protection. It's going to be a long season if you don't have that tackle situation figured out. So that is my biggest red alert position. I have one more that's not as important, but it's still important.
No, that one's definitely the reddest of red alerts for sure. And obviously Derek Carr will agree. Please get me some help up front.
Yes, I agree. The other position is slot cornerback. And in a lot of cases, I wouldn't look at this and say, well, that's its own position. But in today's NFL, it's his own position.
Yeah.
And, over the last 2 years, this defense hasn't had the teeth that I think that we saw from it in the 2020 season and the 2021 season. We have not seen it be as dominating, as aggressive, and you can draw a direct line between that and CJ Gardner-Johnson leaving.
Guy that's in the right place at the right time, had a pick against the Buccaneers the other day.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I understand you had to move on from him. It's like you weren't going to pay him, and he was going to be a impossible person to have in your locker room. I get it. That said, you haven't replaced him.
Nope.
Bradley Roby was serviceable in the slot. He wasn't good. Alontae Taylor was willing in the slot. He's not a slot cornerback. He's not. You benched him in 2 of your last 3 games. He's not a slot cornerback. Stop. Don't do it.
Please stop.
You do need to get a slot cornerback. And, if you look at it and say, maybe we put Tyron in that role, which I don't think that's going to work. Maybe you put Ugo in that role as your starting slot corner, but man, that's a low end option. I don't know. Like, I'd like you to go out and try to find a slot corner, like a premium slot cornerback, whether it's free agency, and I know they don't want to pay that position, but man, I don't know how you can look at these last 2 seasons and look at some of the inefficiencies in terms of stopping the run and tackling and being aggressive and not kind of point to that slot cornerback position. So, I wouldn't mind, and I kind of look at it like, it's similar to me in the draft as you look at, okay, well, you can get a left tackle, but you can only get him at the top end. Whereas you can get the top interior line option in the 2nd round a lot of the time, or at the end of the 1st round. Right. So you should be like, it's the same thing with cornerbacks. Like outside corners, the elite outside corners are going to go in the 1st round, maybe the 2nd round. The guys who profile as a slot corner, maybe that is a 2nd round pick. So I don't know. If I'm the Saints, I'm scouting these guys and I'm looking for the top rated slot corner prospect. And I'm being aggressive and I'm going out and getting them. Because I just think this defense needs that. They need that position to have teeth. It can't be a guy who's getting attacked. And if he is getting attacked, he needs to go out and make plays. And I think when this defense struggled, it was in the slot. Covering tight ends, right? Covering the middle of the field, coming up and run fit, tackling in space. I just think that to me, that's a mission critical piece of this defense that has not been good enough either of the last 2 seasons. And the results have shown that. Even when CJ was out in 2021, right? In the games he missed, you saw this defense be a lot less effective. That's my last red alert position is like, I'm not saying you have to address it a certain way, but you do have to address it, and I hate to tell you, well, who's going to be a free agent this offseason?
Is he?
Mr. Gardner Johnson. Yeah. He signed a 1-year deal with the Lions.
Yeah. Obviously we'll see what happens over there, but I don't know. I don't know if he burned bridges here or not, but he seemed more of a Peyton guy than a DA guy.
Oh, you burned bridges, 100%. There's no way they bring him back. There's no way. But they could, and I wouldn't hate it. But I think some people might hate it.
Fans would love it. Maybe people in the locker room would hate it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying. Yeah. I think yeah. And he does like, it is interesting because it's a different coaching staff. Right? Like Marcus Robertson, Joe Woods, they were not here when CJ was here.
Right.
So it's more just the DA thing. Like, did DA burn the bridges? Did the front office burn the bridges? I don't know.
Yeah, because he clearly has no problems with Dan Campbell or Aaron Glenn.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it was a Christmas.
Yeah, I could see how that personality can run its course though anywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Eagles didn't keep him around. He led the league in interceptions. Exactly. He led the NFL in interceptions.
And they were like, bye.
And missed like 6 games. And they were like, yeah, good. See ya. So it's like, and maybe learn from that. Who knows? I don't know. Because like at a certain point, you got to look in the mirror and be like, maybe it is me.
No, but you talk about, some attitude on the defense. He definitely huge part of that, obviously, because you see that now. There's not that same swagger to whatever you want to call. You still got DeMario and Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, guys like that. But man, oh man, CJ Gardner Johnson, the button pusher, is fantastic.
Tone setter, button pusher. Like as annoying, like it's like there are certain guys who it's like, yeah, I get it. He's tough to handle in the locker room, but he does like, it's like you can't really put a price point on like getting people fired up, right? Like and getting, I don't know, like it's just, I just haven't seen that with this defense over the last 2 years. And I don't know if the Saints need that. I don't know, but I do know they need a top end slot cornerback. And so I need them to go find one this year. And I haven't done a lot of scouting yet to kind of identify who the top rated slot guys are in the draft. And it's tough because defenses in college don't necessarily play the same way. So you don't get really an A to B comparison. But I do think, to me, that's something that this year I really need to see them invest some time and not just say, well, let's see if we can make it work with this guy. Like, get a guy who that's their job. And we'll go from there. But that's the last position I have. You got anything else before we get out of here?
No, I'm a huge one for that too, just because I was frustrated all year just for Alante and hoping that he gets back to the outside and we get to see more of him shining more in this defense, because I know he's capable of a hell of a lot more. Agreed.
But all right, let's wrap up this podcast. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. This is Inside Black and Gold. I want to come back later this week and get into our first mock draft, the one that will be completely wrong, as opposed to the future ones, which are probably just going to be mostly wrong, because it's just going to be a complete guess. But I do think it'll be a good baseline pre-Senior Bowl mock draft, and then we can build from there. That'll be our 1.0. And we just need to decide which mock draft website we're going to use.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one's the best. It's all the same. The only problem is some of them, it's like different, scouting reports or whatever they decide to use. And it's like, okay, which one out of all this do I pick now?
Yeah, last year we used Pro Football Focus, but I think they put it under like a subscription, which I have, but I mean, we'll see. But gotcha. that'll be something coming this week. So keep an eye out for that. And then obviously we'll just be getting into more off-season draft stuff, offensive coordinator search. I expect next couple weeks we'll get an idea and probably get a hire, hopefully before the Senior Bowl. So we'll get into that. But that is for another day. Thank you everyone for listening. This is Inside Black. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve at Steve Geller, WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. And you can check out the latest news, notes, and analysis at WWL.com. Thanks everyone for getting all the way to the end. Why are you still here?
Diehard Saints fans, baby. They're crazy.
Maybe that's it. But all right. Who dat? Go Saints.